about this time of year when the waves are swelling up to giant height and the surfing community is coming together for the bonsai pipeline masters. And me and my friends get to hang out right in the middle of it and watch this thing unfold when the waves get super big and start crashing on the North Shore. And in that house that I rented, we get to hear music like this. I just gotta let it roll. She's got it. Yeah, baby, she's got it. Well, I'm your Venus. I'm your fire, your desire. Well, I'm your Venus. I'm your fire, your desire. God, I love that tune. I don't know why. It just has this rhythm and this roll, and I love it. And I got a vision of listening to tunes like that in a big beach house on the North Shore of Hawaii during surfing season, during all the championships. And I'm going to do it one day, folks. I'm going to take some of you with me, and we're going to go hang out in that house because I got a vision, and it's going to come real. Like most of the visions that I have, sooner or later, they get real. And I got a vision that I call seaplanes and sailboats, which is, on some Caribbean or South Pacific island where we have a little beach hotel and we just, take off from there on little adventures every day. I can imagine quite a lot, and I know you can too. Hello, good morning. Stevie the Guide here from Kerrville, Texas on a beautiful Friday morning. Just before Christmas. We're teetering on the brink of Christmas week, and I want to wish you love and joy and peace. And hey, do I know what I'm doing out here? No, I sure don't. But I'm doing it. I'm bringing it, baby. I'm bringing it any way I know how. And trying to raise the vibration of this planet, bring the balance of the left and right brain back into alignment. The pendulum has swung way too far out of alignment on all sorts of things, but it's coming back now. It's coming back, and it's going to save humanity. That's my mission, save humanity any way I know how. And the best way I know how is to bring that balance and that harmony. And it's kind of like surfing, in a way. Team sports and football and things like that, they got their own sort of art to them, and there's their own sort of rhythm. But there's something quite different about putting yourself on the ocean and having those waves rise up underneath you and aiming yourself down a 40-foot face like Laird Hamilton, my surfing hero, and attuning yourself to the rhythm of the giant power of the ocean and of the universe and all things. And I believe that we all have this ability to align ourselves to the natural order, the natural rhythm, the natural current It's just a matter of practicing and acknowledging that we can do this. And sort of my exercise every morning now for the last 3 weeks and for the foreseeable future is just to throw myself into this ocean and ride any way I can. Will I have a successful ride? Who knows? I may crash and burn. And this happens when you're trying to ride waves, but what am I going to do? I'm going to go, swim back to shore and give up? No, I'm going to paddle back out every day and try to ride another one. And Stevie the Guide here, baby. This is what I do. Now that I'm loose, who knows what's going to happen. But I love it, and I love you. And I'm going to give you whatever I got, just kind of soul surfing. And I believe that everybody has this sort of inner child, this deeper soul, this right brain intuitive that wants to come out, wants to play, wants to have joy. And we get so serious because we're locked into this left brain logical. And it's just sort of love and joy and feeling your way through this current rather than thinking your way through it. You got to think sometimes, otherwise you'll wander out into the street in traffic. So it's all about the balance of the left and right brain. But you got to let that right brain come up. And there's all sorts of ways to do that. There's a natural current, a natural order. I was thinking as I was thinking about this, surfing on the ocean and natural currents and everything. It popped into my mind a little story that happened years ago when I was working offshore. I've spent a lot of time offshore on ships all around the planet in oil exploration and as a scuba diving and wildlife guide and living in Hawaii and the Galapagos Islands and down on the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. I love the ocean. I can't tell you. I love Kerrville, Texas. I love the Texas Hill Country, but I love the ocean and I miss the ocean. And I'm going to take you with me one way or another, whether it's through a camera or physically grab you and take you with me to the ocean. Now, one of the great tragedies of this life here for millions and millions of people is that they never truly get to experience the ocean. And the ocean it's awesome. And that I remember this Tom Hanks movie, Joe versus the Volcano, when he gets, shipwrecked and he's floating on these trunks out there in the ocean and the moon comes up and he's just astonished at what he sees. And he says, I've forgotten how big, and the ocean it's big. And when you look out on it, when you're far from shore and you can see nothing but horizon on every direction of the compass, it's awesome, and it gives you perspective of your place in the universe. You're part of it, and you're huge. You're also just one little drop in it, and it's. There's nothing quite like the ocean. And so one time, many years ago, back in another life, boys and girls, I was on the ocean on a big ship called the Deep Sea Explorer. And I was working for a company called Geosource. That was the original company I worked for. I believe it was them, or Teledyne Exploration. I worked for a bunch of these companies. This is how I navigated my way around the world, is working for these different oil and gas exploration companies. It took me, I got 4.5 years of college at St. Edward's University in Austin, but it took me 10 full years to get that because I was jumping in and out of school and running off with these oil exploration companies. And so I worked for Western Geophysical and Teledyne and Sizecom Delta and Petty Ray Geophysical and Geosource and Rogers Exploration up in that was down in Padre Island, and then their Arma Geophysical was up in Wyoming and North Dakota and southern Utah, they were my vehicle initially to travel around the planet. And anyway, there I was out in the North Atlantic Ocean. They had flown me to New Bedford, Massachusetts, and I got on this 300-foot seismic ship with about 40 men, and we went through the Cape Cod Canal and saw all those beautiful mansions where all the sort of New York banking and corporate elite live. And then we went out in the ocean. We went out around Nova Scotia, and we went right over where the Titanic sank because the navigator told us that's where we were. And this was in late October of the year, which was very late to be traveling out at this part of the ocean. Far offshore. The old Gloucester men, the old fishermen at the bar in New Bedford, Massachusetts, they howled laughing when we told them that we were going up off the coast of Newfoundland into the Labrador Sea to get seismic geophysical data. They thought we were crazy, and we probably were. But we went around Nova Scotia, and we came into the port of St. John's. This is the first time I ever set foot in Canada. And I approached Canada from the ocean. And we were headed into the port of St. John's, Newfoundland. And it's really a stunning sight because you come from way offshore and you see these cliffs in the distance. They're big, tall cliffs. And you come in from offshore and you can see no passage there. I kept asking the captain, where are we going in here? It looks like a giant wall. And he said, no, it's there. And you finally, these cliffs rise up in front of you. And then you can finally see this channel that's like cut through the rocks. And you go through there and it makes you feel like you're in some Jason and the Argonauts movie. And you go through and you come out into this beautiful harbor, beautiful blue. There's no wind. There's these church steeples into the port of St. John's, Newfoundland. It's lovely. And so we got some supplies there, and a couple of the guys got drunk and got into some barroom brawls, which was very entertaining to watch them wreck a bar, for real. And these were the kind of military and sort of offshore ruffians that I used to hang with. This is how I came up in the world. And so we got on the ship. They corralled us all back, got us on the ship, take us 300 or 400 miles to the northeast of St. John's, Newfoundland, in late October of the year. And this is a part of the ocean where the Labrador Sea meets the Gulf Stream, and there's this clash of oceans and currents that happen there, and so we go out, and it was just picture perfect, beautiful weather, lovely weather. I remember this royal blue ocean with this gentle swell. We got this 300-foot ship that's gently traveling over the ocean, and it was so beautiful. And we spent our days preparing all these compressed air guns and this long streamer cable. And this is how you find oil under the ocean, is you shoot these energy waves down through the water, and they penetrate the ground below, and you pick them up on a sensitive seismic cable that's full of these hydrophones. And it's a vibrational type of business, and I learned a lot actually about vibration and frequency and synchronizing the explosions that we made. I mean, when we get rolling on this thing, it's like on a British man of war with a bunch of cannons, a British naval ship back in the 1700s, where all the cannons are firing at the same time. Boom! And it's really quite something. But after you do this for days and days, and these cannons are firing, it rattles your cage quite a bit. But anyway, so we're traveling out there toward Greenland. All right, we were probably 200-300 miles off the coast of Greenland when we finally got to where we were supposed to be, and out in the middle of the ocean. We got everything set up. We're all ready to go. And all of a sudden, without any warning at all, a giant swell came up, a big nor'easter, and the ocean instantly rises. And our little ship, which was going through these gentle, nice waves, all of a sudden it is, 30, 35, 40-foot swells and dashing down in there. There's an action that happens with a boat. Sometimes you see it on naval vessels and other cargo ships. It's called scooping. Scooping is an action where the waves are so high, these swells, that the ship goes way up and then it has to fall down, and actually the nose of the ship just dives into the water, and when it comes back up it scoops a whole bunch of the water and throws it up over the wheelhouse of this giant ship. And it's horrifying when just a few hours before you felt really safe in this giant steel hull. Now it's bobbing like a cork, and you feel super small. And because we had a 2-mile cable streaming behind us, you can't just cut it loose and turn around. When you come into this type of weather, which I now know what the old fishermen are talking about when they refer to the Great Atlantic Rollers, all right? These giant rolling waves that come in. They're not breaking waves like on the beach. They're just huge, enormous swells, and the wind is howling, and you've got to point your nose of your ship straight into that and just ride until it calms down. And that, my friends, was 3.5 days before that weather calmed down for us. We had to ride in this for 3.5 days, 40 men on this tin can in the middle of the ocean. And my God, it didn't matter what religion you were. Sooner or later, every guy on that ship, we had a very diverse crew from all over the world, all sorts of different cultures and creeds and walks of life and religions. And sooner or later, you heard every single one of them say, "Oh, God, please get us out of this." When they say there's no atheists in the foxhole, I know they mean it, all right? Because sooner or later, when the pressure gets high enough and the fear factor gets large enough, you're calling out to something greater than yourself, folks. And it's just the way it is. And so anyway, in the midst of all that, I was 19 years old when we went out in that. And here we are for 3.5 days. I mean, all the pots and pans in the kitchen, the cook, we have been in such beautiful weather that the cook didn't have the cabinets and all the things battened down, and everybody was in a relaxed state. And so stuff was rolling around in the hallways. He was preparing to cook some lobsters for us for dinner. And I had a whole big pot of these lobsters. They are now sliding up and down the hallway of the ship with all sorts of pots and pans and stuff that came out of the office, and, the condiments that came off the dinner table. We were totally unprepared and caught unawares of this thing. And it just went on and on and on. All meals were canceled. Most people were throwing up all over the place after a while, even the most seasoned seamen. And for some reason, I was very lucky that way. I was one of like 3 guys who didn't actually throw up during this, 3.5 days of the storm. And I was very proud of that fact, that I had survived this thing without getting seasick. But ultimately, later in life, I proved that I didn't have the iron stomach that I thought when I was on a fishing boat in Acapulco. But anyway, during this 3.5 days, of course, we were not working. Everybody was either confined to their bunks or whatever. We were not allowed to go out on the deck of the ship. And we just, had to ride. You could try to read a book, but, when you're going up and down like this all day long, it's quite distracting. And so Stevie was trying to figure out something to do, and I got this brilliant idea about putting messages in a bottle. And I wrote out these little messages that said I was a college student studying ocean currents, And if you found this bottle, please send it to my parents' address in Houston. And so I took these Welch's grape juice bottles and cleaned them out and dried them out. And then I put these messages in them and put the top on. And then I sealed it with this special bulldog tape and some Scotch coat, which sealed it up real good. And then I went out in the middle of that storm and I threw 5 bottles off of the ship into the ocean. And then I promptly forgot about it. All right. Now, 6 months later, I got a note from a fisherman in Nova Scotia, which was pretty cool. And it was in this sort of scrawled handwriting. And he said he had picked up one of those bottles in his net. And so that was neat. My mom called me and told me about it. But what was really interesting and really illuminating about the power of current and how far-reaching the ocean current is a man in Scotland on the Isle of Islay. It's pronounced Isla, spelled Islay. When I first read it, I thought it was the Isle of Islay, but it's pronounced the Isle of Islay off the coast of Scotland. And I got the most beautiful letter, and I'm just heartbroken that I don't know where that letter is. It may have gotten thrown out with some of my other stuff in my mom's house. But it was this lovely Gothic script that came in the mail one day, and it said, "Dear Stephen, I was walking down the beach here on the Isle of Islay in Scotland during my lunch break, and I saw your bottle half buried in the sand on our beach. And I opened it up and found your information. And so here is the exact location of where I found it on our island. And I realized that that bottle had taken the Gulf Stream all the way to Scotland and was unbroken. It washed up on the beach and was actually half buried in the sand in some sand dune. And this was 3.5 years later, or 3 years later, something like that. After I threw it off the boat in the storm off the coast of Greenland, it wound up in Scotland in a sand dune. All right, who knows how long it had been sitting there, but the guy was very nice. He was a civil servant of some kind, and he was nice enough to write me this beautiful letter. And he said, "P.S. I really think it would be better to study ocean currents some other way than tossing rubbish into the ocean." It not only taught me about ocean currents, it taught me that people care about trash in the ocean. It's basically, stop throwing your trash onto our beach, and I took that to heart. And these days, part of my penance when I go to the beach is I used to collect seashells all the time, and still secretly I do pick up one or two every now and then because I love seashells, and I got a whole collection that I've collected from all over the world. But as we go forward, it's become less and less correct to collect stuff from the ocean, and so but instead of collecting seashells these days, I collect trash. And that's my penance for throwing those bottles in the ocean is whenever I go to the beach, I collect a little bit of trash and throw in the trash can. And it's just as much fun when you're doing something good and taking care of our ocean. So when you go to the beach, instead of collecting seashells, collect trash. Anyway, it was fascinating to me how I threw that bottle and the current of the ocean, which is the same as the current that's within ourselves. We are riding on a certain current. We are soul surfers moving through not only a physical world, but an invisible current. And I believe part of the exercise is try to figure out how to navigate that current, how to raise your vibration to such a level that you can sense better how that current functions and how you can move around in it effectively. And and it is powerful. And people say, oh, come on, that's ridiculous. Well, just take a look at your cell phone. I'll say it again and again. Your cell phone, radios, televisions, radar, all sorts of things that we depend on every day operate on invisible currents, right? Floating around in space. You can't see them with your visible eyes because you're in a blind sort of exercise here. Understand. When I became a scuba diving instructor, the final test to get my license was they put me in a flooded quarry at Huntsville, Texas, and I had to go into the water. They shoved a piece of tin foil in my scuba mask, all right, where I couldn't see. And so I had to go diving in the water blind. I was deliberately blinded, and there are instructors down there messing with you and turning off your air, flooding your mask, pulling your regulator out of your mouth. They all want to see if you're going to panic or how you're going to find your way without your sight, all right? You have to learn to use your non-visual radar, all right? And that is what we are doing here, folks. Your senses have been given to you in a very limited fashion, and you have less vision than your average dog. Certainly less hearing, and the birds got 10 times the vision you do, and so it's all about trying to surf this ocean current with your powers of intuition, and that's why it's critically important. That's why we're going to save humanity by a deliberate balancing of the left and right brain, relaxing that left brain so the right brain can come up, bring about a balance that will raise the vibration. And once enough people do that collectively, this giant shift is going to happen. I truly believe this, and in the process, you will have more fun and more joy than being locked in that left brain logical that you have been so trained and attuned to doing. It's not all about being serious. It's about being fun and having joy and laughing and giggling and sharing passion with the ones you love. And enjoying them, and not being so focused on amassing, material wealth that, is just temporary. And you'll have an amazing time. Although, hey, having some money is a good thing, right? And so balance in all circumstances. It's about the balance. And so my quote of the day is actually a poem, that poem has to do with who you are and being true to yourself. And it goes like this. When you get what you want in your struggle for self, and the world makes you king for a day, just go to the mirror and look at yourself and see what that man has to say. For it isn't your mother or brother or wife who judgment upon you must pass. The one whose opinion counts most in your life is the one staring back from the glass. He's the one to please. Never mind all the rest, because he's with you clear up till the end. And you've passed your most dangerous, difficult test if the man in the glass is your friend. You can fool the whole world down the pathway of years and get pats on the back as you pass. But your final reward will be heartache and tears if you've cheated the man in the glass. That goes for women too. Don't cheat the person you see in that mirror every day. Be true to yourself. I tell my daughters, follow your heart. It knows the way. All right? And it truly does. It's that heart energy. Did you realize that your heart has like a lot more electromagnetic energy than your brain? You think more with your heart, and it's much more powerful tool for thinking if you will allow it. But it's bringing that balance, that left and right brain balance, bringing that alignment that gives you that heart-centered thought. It enables the heart to do a lot of your thinking for you. And when that happens to enough people, folks, this imbalance of wealth, this extreme difference between poverty and wealth, sickness and health, and all these things that are plaguing our world, a lot of that's going to end. All right, it will end because when a conservative, tight-fisted, wealthy person, all of a sudden, somehow his brain balances out, he will not feel the need as much to be, sort of hoarding all that wealth when he could be saving the world with it. And he will find his wealth in sharing, and people will find their wealth, the true wealth, in lifting us all up to be one whole tribe as we were meant to be, to find that harmony, that equanimity that we were meant to have. And it's all about that balance between left and right brain. And that is how Stevie the Guide is going to help save humanity. Any old way that he can, I'm trying, baby. I'm bringing it, And one cool thing as we are, as we're on the brink of Christmas time, and the lights and the music and the food and just the season, the spirit of the season that reminds us of Jesus, the Christ. And hopefully as we go into this, the Christ consciousness, not just the toys and the lights and the food and everything, but the Christ consciousness will rise, that vibration will rise as we sing the songs and practice our traditions in our churches and with our families and stuff. That joy and that love and that song will raise the vibration and get it a little bit stronger. There's this lady some years ago here in Kerrville, Texas. There's this wonderful lady named Sherry Cunningham. She used to run the Chamber of Commerce. She was my good friend, and she's passed away since then. But I giggle this time of year. I always giggle about Sherry Cunningham because I asked her one year, New Year's or thereafter, sometime in January. I said, "Hi, Sherry, how you doing? How was your Christmas?" And she said, "Oh, it was wonderful. I love Christmas. I love the food, and I love the music, and I love all the smells and the sounds and the lights. And the best lights of all at Christmas are those tail lights when the kids have packed up everything, and those tail lights going out of the driveway when they go home. Those are the best lights of all." She's hysterical. She's a wonderful woman. And anyway, as we go into this sort of Christmas week, I want to talk about prayer and prayer. And I believe there's actually two different kinds of prayer. And there may be more, but to my little noodle brain, there's really two different kinds. And it's actually part of the reason that I joined the Baptist Church. Years ago, I was influenced by Zig Ziglar, my Catholic grandmother. Basically, my history was I was raised in the Catholic Church. And I didn't take to that. I really didn't. And not to disparage my Catholic friends, but it was never for me. And I left as soon as I possibly could. And for the next, more or less 20 years, I ran around as, a wild savage on this planet, and just had a general appreciation for God and just did whatever the heck I wanted, and don't regret that one bit. I was what Augustus McCrae calls a live human being, free on the earth. There was no one that governed me. I had no relationships that governed me. I was only beholden to the oil and gas exploration companies that I worked for, and to the teachers at St. Edward's University. God bless them. They had their work cut out for them when they found me. But anyway, along about the age of 37, 38 years old, I found myself in Dallas, Texas, and I went to a career seminar. My Catholic grandmother had told me never, ever to go into a Baptist church. And she said they were the most narrow-minded bunch of idiots she had ever seen. But did I listen? No. I went to a career seminar, and I found out that I could go see Zig Ziglar for free every Sunday morning, that he taught a Sunday school class there. And that's the only reason I went across from the career seminar it was in the fellowship hall there at Prestonwood Baptist Church, which is this giant Baptist church in Dallas. And I went across the street to the big church and went to Zig Ziglar's Sunday school class there. And I'll tell you, what I found there was different than what I found in the Catholic Church. And if I was to use one word that described how I was drawn into the Baptist Church for over 20 years, the word would be intimacy. Intimacy. There was an intimacy about those Baptist people that I just love, and they were very open and friendly, and and one of the things that they did that was distinctly different from Catholic tradition was their habit of open prayer. And I would go into these Sunday school classes like Zig Ziglar. Or there was another guy named Neil Jeffries, who was an old quarterback from Baylor that stutters. Funny guy, became my good friend. And the Baptists didn't just do these rote prayers, Our Father who art in heaven, or Hail Mary, full of grace, or Now I lay me down to sleep. They didn't do it that way. They had what I call free-flowing prayer. All right, and they would start praying to the Lord, and all of a sudden they would just start spilling out of them ad lib, just straight from the heart. And I admire that so much, and it is this difference between left brain and right brain prayer. All right, and the Baptists, they're masters at this. This free flowing out. And when you take it another step further, it turns into speaking in tongues, which is not necessarily in the Baptist tradition. But speaking in tongues is just a complete letting go of the left brain logical and going straight into the deep well of the intuition and babbling incoherently. And I see that actually as an ancient practice, just like the writhing and drumming and chanting and so forth that free flows out of ancient tribal cultures. That speaking in tongues. But a step down towards the left brain is just this open, intimate prayer. And you see these businessmen who would just pour out their soul in front of a class, and their hopes and dreams and fears and, their care for their family and their children and their love of the Lord and all this stuff that just, intuitively begins to, gush out of them. It's beautiful. And I admire it so much. But at first it freaked me out. And I just never seen anything like that before. It was not part, in Catholic tradition, we go to church, we listen to the sermon, we do all the, things that you're supposed to do, and that was it. We never once went out to lunch with anybody or fellowshipped with anybody, from our church. I didn't know anybody from our church, and it's just their tradition. It's much more dry, much more contained, and it was just our way. And so all of a sudden, it's much more emotional, much more intimate. You get to know people when they say, "Hey, how you doing?" Oftentimes they really wanted to know how you were doing. And it was just a very open way, and it's part of the reason I was drawn into the Baptist Church, accepted Christ, got saved, went on to raise a family in the Baptist Church, and ultimately became a Christian missionary down in Peru. And it was a beautiful era in my life, but this whole idea of left brain and right brain prayer reminds me of a story, believe it or not, and it was really part of the way that I was prepared for intuitive thought. I was forced into a situation that was so grave and so frightening and such high pressure that I had to start spewing intuitively. And here's what happened. In 1994, I was working in the Galapagos Islands as a scuba diving and wildlife guide. And nobody in the Galapagos spoke English, all right? Nobody. There were no English newspapers. Television did not yet exist in the Galapagos Islands at that time. And you know, I had a Spanish-speaking girlfriend who helped me learn Spanish a lot. And I was immersed in the Spanish-speaking culture there, which was really good, you know, because I got to learn the language. But anyway, whenever I didn't have cruises to go on, I would fly back over to Quito, Ecuador, which was a civilization. You know, Galapagos was a tremendously primitive place to live. And I lived there for, you know, 1994 and 1995. And so I would get on a plane and fly, you know, 750, or it's about 1,000 miles from the Galapagos Islands to our company headquarters in Quito, Ecuador, which is about 9,000 feet up in the mountains. And I would go and hang out there for a few weeks. And what I would do oftentimes to find some English-speaking people there was a little church I heard about there in Quito, and I went to it in part just out of, you know, to find some gringos to talk to. I wasn't really between, you know, the ages of, say, 18 and 40. I wasn't really a church-going person at all, and but I went to this little church occasionally just to, you know, meet some people, and they had wonderful blueberry muffins and baked goods and nice coffee, and we'd go hear a message and meet some people that lived there in Quito. A lot of them were oil field, you know, or people like that who lived there, government people who worked for the embassy and things like that. And so I enjoyed that, and I enjoyed, you know, getting to know those folks and hearing a little about the Word of God, you know, and all that. But this pastor, he took an interest in me. This big old tall guy named Kurt. And one day Kurt said, "Hey, Steve, I go every week to the prison here, and I talked to the 8 gringos who are there on drug charges, and would you like to go with me?" And I thought, go to a big prison, you know, sounds like an adventure. And so I said, yeah, I'll go. And so this guy takes me there, and I had no idea what I was about to get into. It was the most horror-filled dungeon I've ever seen in my life. It was an awful place called Moreno Garcia Prison. Garcia Moreno Prison, maybe that's it. Moreno Garcia. Anyway, it's the big prison, big giant theater looking thing there in a bad part of town in Quito, Ecuador. And it's awful. And you got to go through a series of gates, and they mark your hand with a marks-a-lot. And they said, don't wash that off because that's your ticket out of here. And so we go through these big bars like in the old days with a, you know, key, and you can hear it squeak as it opens. You know, and they open these big bars, and then you walk through, and I think these guards take a lot of joy in slamming them behind you, you know, so you're locked in there. And you go down this hallway. They call it, the entrance of the place is called La Boca, which means the mouth. And going down this long hallway down into the prison is called La Garganta, which is the throat. And what you're doing, you're walking down into the belly of the beast, you know. And the first thing I remember was this smell that was coming out of there. And it's this combination of, you know, like cooked tortillas and human sweat and, you know, dank and mold and ugh. It was just this awful thing. And a surprising thing that I heard as we were going down there was the laughter of children. You go down in there on a Saturday, and it's visitors day, and the inmates are all moving around, and their families are down in there, and it's a free open population. And not only are everybody out of their cells running around, and children run around, women run around, but everyone's armed. Okay, everyone has tools and knives and little machetes and things like that. And they've got workshops inside their cells. Some people make shoes, and some people do woodcraft and all sorts of stuff. There are murders in this place all the time, apparently. And the pastor says, just stick close to me. Don't really look at anybody, and certainly don't go over, and talk to them. We're moving through, and because we're gringos and we look different, everybody's attracted to us, and they're like, hey, come on over. You got this whole homosexual population in there. It's trying to attract you to come into their cell, I grab onto the back of this pastor's shirt like a kid in his mother's apron, and we wander back through this whole labyrinthine place, and we come to a cell block. The only cell block, it's like a big wagon wheel with these cell blocks that go off in every direction, and it's 3 stories tall with different cell blocks. You can see people hanging out of the cages and stuff like, it's freaky. And you go back to this one cell block where there's a guy with a big machete, a big old guy standing there, and you got to pass through him to get in. And all the riffraff that are following behind us, they're repelled. They can't go through. But we go through into this other cell block, and it's where the rich people live, okay? This is the high-end neighborhood inside the prison. And that's where all the Colombian drug dealers and the people who have money, that's where they live. And even though it's the same cell block, you got some furniture in there. You got a few pictures hanging on the wall. It's peaceful. You don't have the general population running around in there. And this is where you go if you're a gringo and you get busted for drug trafficking in Ecuador. You go in just by virtue of the fact that you're a white foreigner. They put you in there because they figure sooner or later they're going to get some money out of you. And so we go back in there, and the first thing the pastor does, all of a sudden we're relaxed because we don't have all these people around. There's just a few of the residents, and they've got little things going on in their cells. They say good morning to us. And this one guy has a Mexican restaurant inside of his gym. Goes over there and he orders 10 plates of Mexican food for lunch, and that'll be ready in a couple hours, So I don't think it was that long. It was about an hour. Anyway, we go back in there, and all of a sudden we start to see these white guys coming out of the cells. And we say good morning to several people there in the population. But these white guys all come out, and most of them are Americans. Some of them are Europeans. And they come. There was 7 of them that came out. And they're low, and the pastor, he's met them before, and all of them were, busted for international drug trafficking. They're in Ecuador. Most of them in the Quito airport, and they were, and an interesting thing, almost all of them said they were busted by a woman that they call the lie detector. All right, and the lie detector is this woman in the airport, and whenever the people checking in the bags, whenever they suspect somebody, they send you to this room where you have to talk to the lie detector, and it's a woman that they describe as this really, sort of hard woman with an intense stare, and you've got to sit across the table and stick out your hands, and she holds onto your hands, and you have to maintain eye contact with her, and based on her feeling of your vibration, she decides whether or not they're going to tear your bags apart and search everything. And all these people were busted by the lie detector, and they were carrying cocaine, which is the prominent drug of choice to smuggle out of Ecuador. And the U.S. government apparently pays the Ecuadorian government to bust people and keep them down there because they don't want them in the U.S. Anyway, we get to talking with these guys, and then the food comes, and when the food comes, they start hollering for Philip. And Philip is the only gringo that has not come out of his cell. And they tell us about Philip. They call him a couple of times, and they say Philip was just busted a few weeks ago, and he really hasn't recovered. Emotionally, we've had him on suicide watch because he's so traumatized. He's only 23 years old, and he was living in the Cayman Islands, and he came up here, did a drug run, got busted, and now he's only been here, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks he had been in prison. And they said, he's suicidal, and he cries all the time, and or he doesn't talk. He hasn't said 5 words to anybody. He doesn't talk to anybody, and he just sits in his cell, and we're very concerned about Philip's health. His name is Philip Safra. So anyway, they call for Philip, and the food's gotten there, and Philip's, this young guy walks out of the cell, and he's got sort of strawberry blonde hair and freckles, and he's from Aberdeen, Scotland. I'll never forget him, and had this sort of sullen look on his face, and comes out. We say hello, good morning. He just barely gives us a handshake. He doesn't want to say hello, and he sits down, starts to eat his meal. And so I'm down there, sort of at the other end of the table talking to these guys, and they're asking me about what I do. And I'm talking about being a scuba diving guide in the Galapagos Islands. And Philip perks up, and he starts to say, well, wow, I'm a scuba diver too. And, what kind of equipment do you have out there? And what kind of boats do you travel on? What do you see in the water out there? What kind of marine life is out there? And obviously he's well acquainted with diving, and he was a dive guide in the Cayman Islands. And so the guys at my end of the table, the other inmates, they say, wow, this is a good development. You need to go down there and take your plate of food and go down there, talk to them. So I do. And Philip and I strike up a interesting conversation. I start telling him about the Galapagos, telling him about, what we do out there. And I'm asking him about Cayman, and I've been to Cayman before. And it was all just really friendly until I said, well, so what ship do you work on there in Grand Cayman? And he said, oh, I work on the Lady Kate, which is this beautiful big Hatteras. And he starts to tell me about that, and I was like, wow, the Lady Kate. I said, I've been there, and I've worked. I went on a scuba diving trip on the Lady Kate one time. The owner of that boat is a guy named Ken Cunningham, who's my friend's father. All right, and that's why I got to go on your boat. And that was some years ago. You probably weren't working there, You probably you're and his eyes get really big, okay, when I'm telling him this. And I said, I remember that captain too. His name is Clifton Eubanks. And what about that crazy deckhand? His name is Ashton. And when I said the word Ashton, I mean he rolled back on his chair. He dropped his fork, and his face started to contort, and all of a sudden these big crocodile tears started coming to his eyes, and he couldn't say anything. It was just like he was, and I was like, whoa, what's the matter? All of a sudden he gets up and he just starts crying his eyes out and bolts into his cell, and you can hear him just wailing in there. And I was like, what happened? And those guys that were so happy that I was talking to them, all those inmates, those armed inmates, all of a sudden they're up on their feet, and they come down the other end of the table. And they're like, hey, man, what did you say to him? And I said, I don't know. It's just, I know the owner of the ship he works on. I know his captain. And they were like, oh. They said, you know his people, all right? You know who he works for. He said, he hasn't told anybody that he's here. He hadn't even told his parents over in Aberdeen. He hadn't told the captain or the crew. And he said, nobody knows he's here. And now you know his people. You've looked right into his world. No wonder he's upset. I said, man, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. And that pastor that I came with, he jumps up out of his chair, he runs over and he says, man, this is a divine appointment. You've got to go in there and witness to the guy, and I'm like, witness? What is that? I mean, I didn't even understand what the term meant. All right. I was a pagan, dude. I was running around the planet as a savage. And he was like, you got to go in there. You got to talk to him, pray with him, tell him about the Lord. And I was like, I ain't going in there. Look, listen to him. You can hear him just wailing in there, just crying his eyes out. And he said, look, man, try to understand. You've been brought here for a reason, Steve. You've been brought here for a reason. Somehow this guy's people. Now, look around you. Look where we are. This guy just got an 8-year sentence. He's suicidal. All right. You need to go in there and talk to him. Do whatever you can. All right. And pray with him. All right. So, after a few minutes, I mustered up my courage, and he just went on and on. The crying and the wailing that was coming out of that cell was horrifying. And I really didn't want to go in there, but I did. And I go in there, and Philip Safra was crying more than any human being I've ever seen. Just crying and blubbering and sweating blood, baby. It was the most horrible sight. Just in absolute agony. And I went in there. I said, man, I'm sorry, and I mean, I don't have to tell anybody if you don't want me to, but your parents have got to be worried about you. And when I said that, he just burst out, I can't tell my father, and that's, that was the essence of it. He couldn't tell his dad that he'd been busted. All right, and he didn't know what he was going to do. He'd rather die than tell his father that he had been busted and he was in an Ecuadorian prison as a drug trafficker. And he was ready to die. Of any human being I've ever seen in my life, this kid was ready to check out. If I had handed him a gun, he would have blown his brains out instantly. All right, and I didn't know what to do. I was in a state of panic, and so I didn't know what else to do. And the only appropriate thing to do at the time, it seemed, was just to kneel down by the side of that bunk and bow my head and fold my hands and start to pray any way I knew how. And this is the essence of the reason I'm telling you this story, is that I started with Our Father who art in heaven, and I rolled into Hail Mary, full of grace, and I was about to, go into, now I lay me down to sleep. I didn't know any prayers, okay? I didn't know how to pray, all right? But I could see that it was helping the kid. He began to calm a little bit, and I needed to keep this going, and I didn't know how. So what happened was it switched from the left to the right brain, and I started to pray intuitively. All right. And that's the difference. All of a sudden, I started letting it free flow out, and I prayed for safety, and I prayed for help, and I prayed that somehow we get out of this horrible place, and somehow that Philip could tell his parents, and I prayed for his parents, and I prayed for, people who loved him to, understand, and I prayed for peace, and I prayed for love, and I prayed for whatever the hell I could pray for, and it just started free flowing out of me. And this is what I so admire about Baptists and other people who could free flow that were straight from the heart. And that's where this came from. It didn't come from what I had been taught. It came from what I know. All right. And that's the difference. All right. And it helped him. And ultimately, he got better. He quit crying. He started talking to me. It started flowing out of him. It helped him. It helped heal him. And so ultimately, he allowed me to contact his father. I wrote him a letter. I got him together. And his father came over to Ecuador. They got together. And after a couple of years, they figured out how to get him out of there. And I was sold on the power of intuitive prayer. It left a deep impression on my life, and is what later left me open to the possibility of joining the Baptist Church and getting saved, and going through a wonderful 23-year period in the Baptist Church, and my mind sort of expanded off the reservation a little bit. I've asked too many questions. I reached some boundaries with the Baptist Church, and where I wasn't allowed to go, and so I expanded it. My tribe has no bounds. I'm not into tribalism anymore. But I'm so grateful for the Baptist Church and that ability to free flow my emotions straight to the Lord. And so as we go into Christmas week, folks, I hope you'll take that into consideration. Remembering Jesus and this Christ consciousness that is truly in everyone, that you allow yourself to let go and just free flow with your family, with the people that you love. And as you're praying and you sit down to a nice meal, just free flow everything that you care about, and which means mostly the people in your lives. I love you, and I'm free flowing any way I can, and to me it's a celebration of my love for you and for the Lord, and for our ability to raise that vibration higher and higher, relaxing that left brain logical and bringing up that right brain intuitive, bringing about a balance that'll give us a higher vibration, access to a higher frequency, and ultimately to save humanity. This is Stevie the Guide here from Kerrville, Texas. I love you, and I'll see you next week.